Let me show you how I made this delicious Sunday lunch of oxtail, rice and peas, plantain, sauteed vegetables, and caramel bread pudding. I started by seasoning the oxtail the night before. I seasoned it with garlic, ginger, onion, thyme, scallion, pimento. I also added bouillon powder and ketchup. And then I just massaged the meat just to make sure that every piece is nicely coated with all of the seasonings. And I will have all of these recipes linked below in the description box. I know it's been a while since I've shared any recipe videos here, and I must say that I do miss sharing videos with you guys, and the goal is to be able to do this weekly. So be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the new videos. They will be live on Sundays. Now it's time to cook the oxtail. To my pot I've added oil, and I'm going to add a little bit of brown sugar to make a caramel. I'm basically doing like a brown stewed oxtail. Once the sugar has melted and it's become dark, but you don't want it to be black or else it's going to be bitter, then I'll add the oxtail and just stir that around and allow the oxtail to cook in its own juices. Oxtail is a tougher cut of meat, so it takes quite a while to get it nice and tender. So I am going to be using the pressure cooker function on my Ninja Foodie. I'm going to add enough water to cover the oxtail. First, I pressured it for about 45 minutes, then I checked to see if it was tender. It needed an additional 25 minutes or so before it was just the right amount of tenderness. And the cooking time will depend on the size of your oxtail. While that cooked, I got started on dessert. I had an extra bit of bread, and this was going to go bad soon, so I decided to use it for bread pudding. Now, ideally, you do want to use a bread that's a little bit more firm, but to be honest with you, sandwich bread works just fine. And I'm just cutting the bread up into small cubes. You can even tear the bread. It does not have to be perfect. What I'm going to do, since this bread didn't get a chance to become stale, I am going to place it onto my baking sheet and then place it into the oven and let it toast for about 15 minutes on 350 degrees. This just gives it a better texture once you mix the bread with the custard. And this was a fairly quick process. Once the bread was toasted, I removed it from the oven and allowed it to cool. Then I got started on making the custard for the bread pudding, and this is very, very simple. I know bread pudding tends to get a bad rap, but to be honest with you, it's such an easy dessert and it is absolutely delicious. To make the custard, I'm going to whip together eggs with vanilla extract, nutmeg, and cinnamon. And I am just whisking this together just to make sure that the egg is thoroughly beaten and the yolks and everything is nicely incorporated with the whites before adding the milk and heavy cream. Next, I am adding a combination of heavy cream and milk, but you can also use half and half. To sweeten the custard, I am using sweetened condensed milk. You can also just use white sugar as well. Using my whisk, I am just going to whip this all together just to make sure all of these ingredients are nicely blended together, because you just don't want chunks of this, chunks of that. Then I'm going to add that bread that I toasted earlier. Then I'm going to mix this all together and just sort of push the bread down into the custard just to make sure it's nicely coated. Now, if it's a little too dry, you can add some milk. Just don't add a lot, just add a little at a time. And that's pretty much it. This is how simple it is to make a bread pudding. Of course, you can also add things like chocolate chips into it. You can add fruit into it. It's so easy and versatile. Then I'm going to place the bread pudding into my butter dish. For some reason, I have this habit. I always have to have another pan at the bottom. Like, I'm always afraid that whatever I'm cooking is going to bubble over and it's going to fall into the bottom of the oven and make a mess. So I always put my baking dish onto another pan just to catch that spill, just in case. While that bakes, it's time to get started on the rice and peas. I had some kidney beans that I had boiled before and I had it in the freezer. So I just defrosted that, placed it into my pot, covered it, and allowed it to heat up. While that cooks, I am going to wash the rice, and I'm using long grain rice for this recipe. So I want to wash it thoroughly because I want to make sure to get rid of all that starch, because I don't want the rice to be too sticky. And I wash the rice about 3 times. This is going to ensure that once it cooks, the rice is going to be nice and fluffy. Now that the kidney beans, aka the peas in the dish, has defrosted and it's come to a boil, I'm going to add the coconut milk. I'm going to give it a stir, then I'm going to add the seasonings. To that, I'm going to add pimento, scallion, garlic, pepper, thyme. Then I'm also going to add that washed rice. I'm going to give this a good stir, then let it come to a boil before reducing the heat to a simmer. I'm going to cover the pot and allow it to cook like that because essentially you want the rice to steam, so you want to cook it on the lowest setting possible. While that cooks, I'm going to get started on making the sauteed vegetables. And I had a piece of cabbage, so I'm like, you know what, let me just make the cabbage and the carrots, and I like mine to be cut really fine, so that's how I am doing it. Once I'm done with the cabbage, I'm going to get started on the carrots, and I'm just going to peel the carrots and shred it really fine as well. And I'm using this nifty tool that I got off of Amazon. I'll show you there in a second, and it gets the carrots just the perfect texture, just the way that I like it. The reason why I like to have the carrots and the cabbage so finely shredded is because essentially I just do a really quick saute, and I like the vegetables to still have some texture. I do not like it to be completely soft, so that's how I make it. And I'm going to saute the vegetables in some olive oil. I'm also going to add a little bit of ginger. I just like the flavor that it gives the vegetables. I'm also going to add a pinch of salt, just a little bit. Next, I'm going to stir fry this for just a few minutes. Because everything is so finely shredded, this takes just about 5 minutes or so. And as you can see, this is how I like it. It's wilted somewhat, but it still has some crunch. Next, I'm going to get started on the plantains, and I'm just going to peel the plantains. And let me just say that I was unable to find super ripe plantains, so I settled for this. And I probably should have just done the green plantains instead, because to be honest with you, I feel as though for me it either has to be super green or it has to be super sweet. I'm not necessarily a fan of the in-between plantain, but I will say this, my mother-in-law and other people in the house, they enjoyed it. So what about you? Let me know how you like your plantain. Do you like it green? Do you like it sweet? Do you like it in between? Or it doesn't matter? Let me know in the comment section. Now once I've peeled the plantains, I've sliced them up, and then I am going to fry them in some oil. And this doesn't take too long, so please don't turn your back on the plantain or else it will burn. Once it's browned on one side, I'm just going to flip it over and allow it to cook on the other side. And now it's time to check on the star of the dish, and that is the oxtail. So at this point, it was cooking for about an hour, 10 minutes or so. It was pressuring for an hour, 10 minutes. And it was finally at the right tenderness, but like I said, the cooking time will depend on the size of your oxtails. Mine are actually pretty thick, and this is why it took so long. But now that it is tender, as you can see, I can easily remove it using a fork. I'm going to add butter beans. I'm also going to add a wiri pepper. I removed the seeds because of my kids. And I'm going to also add some salt. Then I let this cook until the butter beans are tender and the sauce is thickened. And then I decided to add some spinners. And this is just flour and water. You just spin it in between your hands, hence the name, and drop it into the stew. This cooks for about 10 minutes or so, and then it's pretty much done. And the next step is to make the caramel for the bread pudding, and I'm doing the shortcut version. I'm using these caramels that you can find in the baking section and heating it in the microwave with milk. And I am just going to stir it around until the caramel is melted and smooth and it has the right consistency. Now the bread pudding has been out of the oven, so it's cooled down a bit, but it's still warm. And I'm just going to pour that caramel all over the top. And that is it. I've cooked a complete Sunday lunch. Now it's time to plate up. We're going to add the rice and peas with that delicious, tender, fall off the bone oxtail Of course, we have our sauteed vegetables and the fried plantain. There's a little piece of avocado. And to end the meal, we're of course going to have some of that delicious caramel bread pudding. Thank you guys for joining me. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, and I will see you guys next week Sunday.